Here we go. Good afternoon, everyone. Thank you all for joining us today. Today we're going to provide an overview of the Veteran Entrepreneurship national survey that was conducted in 2022. And the topic for today's VetNet is data-driven entrepreneurship, unlocking opportunities for rural veterans. So I would like to go ahead and introduce two of my colleagues. So Adam Pritchard, who is the IVMF Research Associate, and he provides, great work within our research department. Also, we have Anna Blanche-Rabe, who is the Coalition for Veteran-Owned Business and Center of Excellence Program Manager. And together, what they'll be doing is providing an overview and insights of the 2022 National Survey of Military-Affiliated Entrepreneurs and some resources that you can take advantage of as a veteran or military spouse entrepreneur. So without further ado, I'd like to go ahead and pass it over to Adam, as well as Anna for these insights.
Alexander, thank you. I appreciate it and welcome everybody, and appreciate everybody coming and attending today. My name is Adam Pritchard. I'm a research associate here at the IVMF. I've been here for about 2.5 years. And before that, I spent about 10 or 15 years as a sociologist. I'm originally from East Tennessee. So my background is in Appalachia, which is, for those of you who are familiar with rural America, one of the most persistently poor areas of the country for generations. And so this topic is near and dear to my heart. And I'm also a PhD sociologist from the University of Kentucky. And they also do a lot of agricultural rural research as well. So that is my background interest. My father is an Air Force veteran. He's a retired Air Force. And so this is a great opportunity for me to come in here and share some of my expertise with you today. Yanni, you're on mute.
Okay. Apologies. My name is Anna Blanche-Rabe. As Cassandra said, I am with the Entrepreneurship and Small Business team with IVMF. I am a lawyer by training and recently joined IVMF to work with some of our startup and growth stage businesses within the Coalition for Veteran-Owned Business and the Center of Excellence for Veteran Entrepreneurship. I too grew up in a rural area. I grew up in rural Australia. And so this particular area of research is something that Adam and I have really enjoyed talking through and talking about a great deal. And the work that Dr. Pritchard and some of his colleagues in research and analytics have done an excellent job of really digging down into the National Survey for Military Affiliated Entrepreneurs to try and pull out some of the insights that are going to be most helpful to you as IVMF alumni and as military affiliated entrepreneurs. All right, Adam, let's talk data.
All right, let's do it. So let me tell you a little bit about the National Survey of Military Affiliated Entrepreneurs. This is a project IVMF has done for 3 years now. It's sort of a composition of longitudinal and cross-sectional, which means that we have some folks who've taken it year after year and some folks who are taking it just one of the 3 years. But we have 3 years worth of data here. The data we're going to present here is from the 2022 survey, which was the most recent round. For this one, we added in some more questions about rural entrepreneurship because we wanted to start talking about these topics in a little bit more detail. So this year's survey had about 1,600 participants, 1,593 exactly. 1,358 were veterans who were current business owners, and that's the sort of sample frame that we use to talk about entrepreneurship. So let's go on to the first slide. All right, so when we talk about rural entrepreneurship, we really want to set the table with an understanding of who exactly we're talking about. So estimates, of course, are just that. And so let me give you the sort of estimate of the veteran population, around 17 million veterans in the United States, according to the Census Bureau. And around 3 million were living in what we consider to be non-metropolitan areas as of 2021. So that is veterans living in these places. And so when we talk about Metropolitan, non-metropolitan, there's a lot of different ways we can talk about rural. Rural has many different definitions. It's sort of a combination of population size and the nature of the economy in those places. Non-metropolitan is one way to look at it. Whether you're in a city or in a small town is another way to look at it. Population density is another way to look at it. Where you work, sometimes you might live in a very small town, but your job is in a very large city and you commute. So there's a lot of different ways of cutting up rural. So this is one way to do that. So when we think about that, roughly we're looking at folks living outside of major cities or non-metropolitan areas. That's the city and the suburbs. But what you do find when you look at these areas that are not inside a major city, veterans make up 8% of these non-metropolitan residents compared to about 6% of U.S. residents overall, which means veterans are represented at higher rates in rural places than in non-rural places. And we also see this reflected in the annual business survey. The annual business survey is by the Census Bureau as well. We see veteran-owned businesses in rural places account for about 16% of veteran-owned businesses in America, and account for more than $115 million in revenue. So let's move forward and talk a little bit about this sample. So in our sample, in our survey, we had 39% of the veteran business owners that participated in our survey were from rural places, and that is by their self-definition of what type of community they live in. So it's a pretty good size sample, and it shows that a lot of the folks that we engage and that participate in veteran entrepreneurship are living in rural places. So we had about 61% in urban and 39% in rural. And here's the definition that we went with. Really, in terms of rural, we want to get a sense of the type of town you live in. Is it a very large city, metropolitan area, or do you live in a small town that is a city, 50,000 people or less? A rural place that is a farm or ranch, or a rural place that is not farm or ranch. And that distinction is really important because these days, I think a lot of people have a stereotype in their head that rural means farm. And rural doesn't necessarily mean farm. Rural means away from large cities. But that doesn't necessarily mean that they're agricultural. A lot of the places that I'm from, for example, in Appalachia, we live in the mountains, and mountains are not very good for agriculture. So you have different types of business. And in fact, the mountains are a great example because a lot of rural places are shifting towards like tourism and things like that instead of, traditional industries of agriculture or resource extraction. So that's a kind of a context here. So when we look at who veteran businesses are in rural places, one of the things that really stands out is that in rural places, veteran-owned businesses are family businesses. So if you look down here, there's 60% or so, 59% of veteran business owners in rural areas have family co-owners compared to only 47% in urban places. So you also see a history of family business ownership. You see the importance of family in making business decisions. And this is one of the major factors that drives these businesses. In the way of a few demographics, about 3/4 of veteran rural business owners are male. This is the same in rural or urban places. But in terms of race and ethnicity, rural business owners are more likely to be white. But there are some interesting caveats there. They're a lot more likely to be white, a lot less likely, about 60% as many proportionately Black or African American business owners in rural compared to urban places, but you have twice as many indigenous business owners in rural places as well. So you get kind of a different flavor of what a rural community might look like in terms of veteran business owners. So let's go on to the next section here.
Okay, so I'm going to talk a little bit about some of the resources that might be available specifically if you're in an urban area. So I'm also going to invite you, if you have specific questions about resources that you're struggling to find or that you're looking for particularly, please write in the chat and let us know, and we'll try to make sure that we address either during this session or later. So I wanted to kind of just point out some of the resources. I wanted to point out some of the resources that are available for those that are in rural areas, as we said, from those that are in cities or towns of less than 50,000 people and smaller. And I'm going to point to a few different things. So local chambers of commerce, you will still find those in much smaller centers. They can be an excellent source of resources, especially in the context of family business. Small business development centers, which are part of the Small Business Administration, they are often found they are often found co-located with community colleges. And so if there's a community college nearby, that can be a really great source of resources. We often find too that service clubs, and by service clubs, I mean organizations like Kiwanis, Lions, Elk, Rotary, can be a really great place to meet and connect with other business owners, both within the military affiliated context and externally. And then finally, another great place of resources for those operating rural businesses, both farm and ranch and non-farm and ranch, because as Adam pointed out, the assumption that everyone in a rural area is a farmer or a rancher is not accurate, are those of the co-op and extensions that you find, whether they're USDA co-ops or whether they are extensions of the community college or local university. We like to, or when I say we, I mean the work that I do with the Coalition for Veteran-Owned Business at IVMF, we like to separate these things out in this sort of geographic location. So we do hyperlocal, which is going to be anything that is kind of county level or smaller. Then we start to talk about state, multi-state, and national. And so some of the state level resources that are going to be helpful for those in rural and non-urban environments are still going to be your veteran service organizations. So sometimes your AMVETS post or your VFW post can be very helpful. Similarly, there are now 24 state veterans chambers of commerce. If you're struggling to identify whether there's one in your state, there is a website now for the National Coalition of State Veterans Chamber that can provide additional information. And then finally, Bunker Labs is in a lot of different US states. And so are state level economic development authorities, which are often very, very helpful for exploring opportunities at each state level. I will talk a little bit more about some of the USDA resources later, but I certainly wanted to point out the Agricultural Innovation Center program, which is one of the USDA's programs that is really trying to connect with veterans. So I'm also going to make sure, and I know that Cassandra is sharing some excellent links there in the chat. I'm also going to add one here myself, and it is to the USDA, the US Department of Agriculture's initiative specifically focused on the veteran and military connected community. And so that's good too. How many of you, and you can let me know in the chat if you've not heard of them, but how many of you have heard of or are connected to the Veteran Farmer Coalition? I'd love to hear how many of you know about that. They have an event coming up in November in Washington, D.C. in conjunction with the U.S. Department of Agriculture. That is an event that I will be at. We will have an IVMF presence there. But it's a great opportunity to connect with those that are looking at expanding opportunities for military-connected entrepreneurs within the agricultural farming sector specifically. I also wanted to kind of just remind everybody again of the Service-Disabled Veteran-Owned Small Business Surplus Equipment Program. This can be particularly helpful for those in rural areas because the kinds of equipment that is often made available through that particular program for much lower than market rate is often heavy duty equipment. So earth moving, landscaping, larger trucks and things like that, which may be of assistance to some of the businesses that are operating in some of the rural environments. So I'll talk a little more later, but I'll also look at the chat for additional questions. Adam, would you like to continue?
Absolutely. So I think this provides important context, and being able to reach out and connect to these other resources, whether they're for small businesses or for veterans, is absolutely critical for folks living in rural places. And the reason is that a lot of entrepreneurship, as you know, if you've participated in any of IVMF programs, a lot of the power of entrepreneurship is those network connections that you have, being able to connect with others who are either in your space, in your industry, in other industries, or folks that can be mentors and folks that can help you when business needs arise. And so because having people to talk to and connect with about your businesses is critical to entrepreneurs, especially as they're starting out, this becomes a crucial point of conversation in rural communities, because rural communities tend to be smaller, they tend to be less complex, and so you tend to have patterns like you see here. One of the takeaways from our data was that folks living in rural places were a lot less likely to have someone they could talk to about their business when they needed help. So you have, 29, almost 30% said, I don't have anyone that I know personally that I can rely on for help in my business. And that's, considerably higher, 1 in 3 instead of 1 in 4 in urban places. And so what you're seeing here is sort of an effect where, when you are less likely to be surrounded by a variety of people, you're less likely to have those kinds of social connections. You see the same thing here, right? In rural places, 61% compared to 68% in urban say the people I can rely on for the help actually live in my own community. And so those are just some of the challenges that kind of skew against rural communities. And then another major point, I think this is something that comes up a lot in entrepreneurship as an advantage for veteran entrepreneurs, is that, for civilian entrepreneurs, they sort of ask, well, what am I going to do for healthcare if I start a business? A lot of veterans, they have that answered through access to benefits through their military service. However, that advantage doesn't necessarily hold in a place where you can't access that healthcare as easily. And you see here on this graphic, if you look at the rural population, which is the blue line here. Apologies for not having that labeled, but on the blue line, you can see 26%, 1 in 4 rural veterans have to travel more than 30 miles to access healthcare. And so if you combine that with those first two categories, you're talking about, 40% having to travel at least, 20 miles to get healthcare, and that's only 20%. So that's double compared to the urban population. So what you're seeing is those kinds of challenges. So you see these slight differences that sort of cumulatively start to add up and create this sort of social challenge. So let's go on to the next slide and talk in more tangible business challenges. So when you look at the business environment in urban and rural places, I think the one thing I want to draw your attention to is on this part to the left here, the second line there: resources in my community are available to me within a reasonable physical distance. Urban populations, 60% say yes, rural populations less than half. So that's a really big point that stands out. So having those resources available in that area, it really stands out. And then the second from the bottom, the types of resources that are available in my community are relevant to my business needs. You also see a 10% gap there. Only a third of rural business owners said that the resources that are available are relevant to them, compared to 43% in urban places. And so those are the kinds of resource gaps as well. So it's not just network gaps. There are also resource gaps that they're not exactly what you need, and they're not exactly where you need them to be. And you also see this frustration kind of expressed in the line before that, right? I would prefer to use in-person resources, but can't do so. Slightly higher, about 5 or 6% higher, 34% compared to 28%. On the other hand, on the other hand, can we go back to the previous? Back one more. There you go. Yeah. And on the other hand, when you look at the importance of local markets, you also see a difference in the type of customers that you have. So you also have a difference in the type of business. In rural places, local customers living in the town that you're in, less important than in urban places. And that makes sense. In an urban business, you have a large population base of customers. In rural places, you may not. And so your business may involve doing something outside of your community, or selling to customers outside of your community, or being a supplier outside of your community. And so you see this less of a focus on the local market, and more of a focus on reaching out to others outside of your market. And what that means is you need additional types of resources to be able to do that, resources that may not be available. And then those kinds of practical hands-on resources, right? The 10% gap again in, not being able to find like a local business incubator to support the development of your business.
Okay, so to address some of these concerns that particularly address the challenges for rural entrepreneurs, we tried to gather from our community services team at IVMF some places to start, especially on the social support and healthcare side. So we wanted to just kind of share again, and some of these organizations you may well have heard of, but particularly things like the Disabled American Veterans and Paralyzed Veterans of America have some really innovative hybrid approaches to social support. Similarly, your VA community resource centers are actually trying to do more connecting of veterans in local communities together as well. some of the prior service connection teams, so Soldier for Life and Marine for Life, are doing a lot now too to try to connect on a local level as well. Obviously, there's still always more that can be done. And as we've seen, that social support is a particular challenge for those in rural communities, which is one of the reasons I tried to skew some of the resources we're sharing here to what's happening on a hyperlocal level and not just share those that are happening at hybrid and remote, right? Because we know that when you live in a smaller community, you want to be connected within that community as much as possible. And sometimes it's a challenge. The tyranny of distance can be a real challenge too. So healthcare in particular, we wanted to point to the rural health resource centers that are focused particularly on veterans, and also your programs like Headstrong and Healing Warriors that can offer additional services, especially for those who are having to travel longer distances. Excuse me. I also, once again, kind of wanted to point out that, focus on trying to seek out those resources that are local, that are not necessarily military connected, but that can help build your business skills and that it can help give you resources. So, for example, if you're going through the process of doing market research, there are often a lot of resources available through local library networks. Some of those might be something you can access online, but actually sometimes it's also about accessing them through a local librarian and things like that. One of the things that I wanted to share on that is that we were looking too at opportunities to be able to access, good quality internet. I know that can be a real challenge and certainly has been a challenge in some of the more rural and remote areas of the US that I've lived in. We spent 6 years in New Mexico, and internet was always a major challenge for us out there. And so I know that we're not necessarily promoting a particular brand, but we know that with a military discount, you can access things like Starlink through Home Depot and utilize your military discount to try and obtain that more cheaply. I also wanted to just share a couple of the business incubators and nonprofits that are starting to try to offer their programming, at least parts of the phases of their programming, remotely. So IVMF has the Entrepreneur Bootcamp for veterans. The first phase is always remote. We also work with you particularly to try to connect you to a location that is convenient to you. We fly you to the second part of that cohort in person. I know we have some alumni here, but if you haven't gone through a VWISE program, if you're a woman veteran or woman military spouse, the Veteran Women Igniting the Spirit of Entrepreneurship, we find that's particularly attractive to women veterans and women military spouses living in remote areas, because once again, that first cohort is done at a distance and everyone's doing it in the same way. Dog Tag Bakery, which originally started out on site in Washington, D.C., now has a lot of its programming. They're able to offer cohorts at a distance. They can work with you to try to find a commercial kitchen to do preparation, but you don't actually have to be focused on bakeries to enjoy that program. So if you're looking at a value add, a rural product that you're trying to develop, that Dog Tag Bakery Fellowship can be a really great program to explore. The Small Business Administration has import and export training that you can access, some of which is available in a hybrid or remote format. Similarly, Patriot Bootcamp, if you're interested in building your business in a way that takes advantage of technology, either as a platform. I know a company a few years ago, also an IVMF alumni company, that farms crickets, and they went through Patriot Bootcamp to develop a really interesting way of monitoring and measuring the growth of that particular product. So those are some other resources as well. I did have a particular question in the chat around service disabled veteran-owned small business access to the federal surplus program. I will share a link with you for the SBA resource for that, and I'll share that in the general chat for everybody else. Thank you so much, Cassandra, for sharing these links. I really appreciate that.
All
right,
let's
Adam,
go to the next
apologies.
slide. Yeah, you're good. So this is a thing I always like to do is point out that there's more diversity within rural than between urban and rural. Rural is very, very diverse. And so one of the things that we wanted to be able to do with this data was to break down some of those different flavors of rural and give you a sense. And one of the ways you can see that is by taking the three rural categories and really disaggregating them. So from here on out, I'm going to talk a little bit about the different types of rural places, comparing the small cities or towns. Those are places with a population of under 50,000 versus the farm or ranch, and then the sort of in between rural but not farm or ranch categories. What you see amongst rural veteran entrepreneurs is about 44% consider themselves to be social entrepreneurs. And that means somebody who develops products or services that create solutions to social, cultural, or environmental issues. And so it's a pretty good proportion, nearly half. And then a lot of them are registered as 501c3s. And you see that's a lot more common. 52%, almost half of the farm or ranch businesses were 501c3s. So a little bit of context there. So that comes with different types of challenges. For example, like tax and legal challenges when you're operating as a 501c3, which requires you to have resources to make sure you understand and operate those correctly. So again, more of that resource conversation. So when you look at entrepreneurship in these different places, well, you want to get a sense of what kind of businesses there are. So I have a little bit of extra data here that's not on the slide. And when you look at what types of businesses by the NAICS codes across the board, most small businesses are in the sort of professional, scientific, technical services category, which is like consulting, kind of professional service categories. But you see a very different picture in the farm or ranch communities. Only about 20% are those consulting professional services businesses, and 20% are agriculture, which in our survey, it made up about 60% of all the people who have any kind of agricultural based business. Full 60% of those were living in these remote farm or ranch communities. And then another 12% of those remote businesses are construction. Compared to when you look at the rural non-farm or ranch retail, manufacturing show up as prevalent categories. And you look at the small cities, same thing. Other types of services actually rises to the top. There's about 6% of businesses in the small cities or towns are other services. That's thinking like automotive, hair care, like small kind of retail businesses that are not selling a product, but rather selling a service. And so that's important to kind of think about the sort of picture of the types of businesses that operate in these different environments. So if you look at the reasons down here where why people started businesses, I think one of the big takeaways here is that the rural non-farm communities, the places that are not a small city and the places that are not a farm, they were the most likely to engage in entrepreneurship out of necessity. Right. They did so not necessarily because they wanted a challenge, not necessarily because they didn't need more income, but rather that you see that category, right there in the middle. You see a lot more likely to have started businesses for other reasons. And so this is basically necessity. Sort of necessity entrepreneurship, right? You see down at the very bottom line, needed a main source of income and could not get a job, 20% compared to 10, nearly double in the other types of areas for the farm or ranch. But you also see lower rates of wanting a challenge and did not need more income in the rural or farm. So you start to see this sort of flavor of rural communities where, a lot of entrepreneurship we kind of think of as people who see an opportunity and seize it. In rural places, there's a little bit more entrepreneurship out of necessity. So that's something to think about. Again, in the farm ranch places, almost 1 in 5 people did so because there were not jobs available. And so that's something to think about in terms of who these populations are. And if you are somebody who works with rural entrepreneurship, to recognize that sometimes, there's a different need and a different reason for doing entrepreneurship. Again, you compare this with a family business, family business needing to find a way to make income. So let's go on to the next slide. Same thing as we continue on to look at the types of businesses. Over half of all rural businesses on this top line here, this top box, over half of rural businesses are service-based business, 55%. And that is largely driven by the small town or the rural non-farm. When you look at the farm, that drops precipitously, right? And I think what's really fascinating is you might expect agricultural businesses to be product-based businesses, right? But they're not. They are both product and service-based businesses, kind of reflecting the transition of rural from being sort of extractive or productive to being a combination of sort of tourism and businesses. If you think of a lot of successful agriculture, successful farms and things like that today, you end up something that is a combination of both a shop that people can visit, a place where people can come and do a hayride, but also a working farm, right? And so recognizing that the need to be able to do both product and service is very, very high in the places that are likely to have the least amount of resources to support a diverse type of business operation. And so that's an important distinction there for those types of businesses. The other thing you see is that these same businesses, these farm and ranch businesses, are the least likely to be profitable. If you look at the box down at the bottom, around 60% of the non-farm or small city businesses turned a profit, while the farm and ranch businesses had lower profitability on average, more likely to have incurred a loss during the year of 2021. This is sort of reflected also in the business debt. You start to look at revenue. You start to look at business revenue here. We'll talk about debt in a minute, but you have a lot lower revenues, almost half for the farm and ranch communities compared to the small town or city. And rural businesses are do a little less revenue than urban businesses, which you may expect. But recognizing that the smaller the place, the less revenue and the more tight the profit margins are. Rosanna?
Yeah, so I wanted to kind of, building off on that, here's an opportunity that I wanted to share with you, and that was whether you have a product or a service, we have this buy military-owned shopping guide that you can list your products and services on. When you do that, please let us know if that's something that you can ship and where you can ship it. But we have seen a number of our alumni be very successful, and I wanted to share this because 57% of those on the buy military-owned shopping guide are products and 43% are services. And so we get a good combination of both. There is a place for all of you. The link is just there, and I know that Cassandra has just shared it as well. But I wanted to point this out as another opportunity to gain additional clients for those that are customers, for those that are selling in these rural environments. But I want to get back to what Adam was saying. Let's go. This is so interesting. Oh, yes, here you go. For those that are at that, you can go back to the next slide. I wanted to just share this as well. Next March, we have our Veteran Edge conference. This conference is for those in growth stage businesses. And given that we just saw the averages there, our average annual revenue this last year was 1.8 million. But we do have a lot of businesses that are, as long as they're over 100,000 or 150,000 annual revenue, Veteran Edge may well be the right kind of growth stage conference for you. We have had an increase in entrepreneurs from rural locations. In fact, this year we had an area outside Raleigh, North Carolina, as one of our top 5 cities, or urban areas, with the attendant rural region around it. Okay, I think I can throw it back to you, Adam. There we go.
Right. So one of the things we've really tried to talk a lot about recently at IVMF and really put a lot of effort into throughout our portfolios is financial readiness for business, right? Being able to fund your business and being able to do that, ready to do that, and having the know-how to do that. That's something that we've worked on. I know I've presented research on minority-owned businesses and women-owned businesses and other categories. And this is another category we really want to focus on, is trying to help rural entrepreneurs get access to the capital they need to operate their businesses. So one of the things we ask in the survey is, about business debt. You see sort of the same picture from the previous slide, right? That the farm and ranch communities carry heavier business debt loads. And you see, comparable rates of applying for credit between rural and urban in general. What you see is the continuing story of not only are urban businesses larger, they also carry more debt. But the interesting story, if you look on the kind of left side of the picture here, you see the amount of debt carried by rural businesses increases with the rurality of that business. So small towns or cities carry less debt than folks living in rural non-farm places, and the farm or ranch places have the highest average debt of any type of business, even more so than urban businesses. And if you recall from the previous slide I presented, the urban businesses did about $3.8 million worth of revenue, while the farm and ranch businesses did 1.5 million. So they have about a third of the revenue with more debt. And so that's just the nature, of agricultural businesses. That's the nature of, those fields. Like I said, they're in construction, they're in agriculture, and that requires you to buy, if anybody knows anything about agriculture, if you're buying a $280,000 combine, that's a big upfront investment for a farm that takes a number of years and a large cash flow to invest. It's a lot of upfront investment and then kind of recouping that when you do agricultural business. And so that's a consideration. That's sort of a reflection of the nature of farm and ranch work. And so when you look also how much capital folks need, you see that reflected here. You see the farm and ranch businesses are the ones that overwhelmingly require at least $100,000 worth of capital to expand and grow their businesses in a given year. What's interesting, you see in the small towns and cities, 40%, 38% said they needed less than 25,000. So there are interesting opportunities here for folks in rural places that are in small cities to need a very small capital investment to be able to make important strides in their businesses. Those are also the businesses that have more employees. Those are the real drivers of economic growth. So you can really make a good proposition here, a good value proposition for investing in veteran-owned businesses in small towns and cities from this type of data that's in this thing. And then the other piece I wanted to share with you was the were you able to secure the business or the funding that you needed? And interestingly, the farms or ranches, they had the most capital needs, and they were more likely to completely or partially be able to fund those capital needs. And that's largely done so because there are resources available for those types of businesses. But what we're interested in doing here is trying to find ways to connect all of our veteran business owners with the resources they need to be successful in capital acquisition. Anna?
Yeah, so as we're thinking about this more, you're going to hear us, because access to capital has been a challenge for a long time, right? So we've been looking at this challenge in new and different ways. How do we approach capital readiness and supporting military affiliated entrepreneurs to be able to access the capital they need? Because even looking at those numbers, you still had less than a third are actually able to kind of meet all of the requirements that they think they need. So we want to kind of take it a step back and kind of just, reinforce that there are some resources kind of from the beginning. So one of the most common reasons that people are turned down for business capital is actually just not having their own financial affairs together, having a challenge with their own credit score and things like that as they approach business financing. And so even if you have a company, an LLC or a C Corp, or formed, or you have a 501c3 that doesn't necessarily have a lot of capital, it might still depend on the business owner's own credit score to be able to determine what kind of credit risk they are. And so I wanted to just remind everybody that if you have base access, you can still access personal financial counselors if you have a base nearby or remotely close. And sometimes they will do telephone appointments. Military OneSource does have financial counseling referrals available to some classes of veterans. Unfortunately, it's not available to everybody, but I wanted to just share that. There are also there is a group of military financial counselors as part of MilCon that offers some pro bono financial counseling as well, if that's something that you're interested in exploring. Once again, going back to first principles, looking at your business plan and, before you go to a lender or a funder, considering whether your business plan adequately explains the potential for profit, adequately explains how you're planning on using the money that you're asking for. If you are looking for templates, documents that will help you prepare for that, both the SBA website and the SCORE website, and SCORE used to stand for the Service Corps of Retired Executives, it now just goes by the acronym SCORE. Their websites have excellent startup budget templates for all sorts of sectors, including, rural, non-farm, farm, agriculture, product-based businesses, and all of that kind of thing. They also have costs of goods sold templates, which can be really, really helpful for establishing what your per unit cost is and the kind of overarching expenses your business has. Because once you're able to establish that profit potential, it's much more likely that you're able to access the capital that you need. I also wanted to point out that Boots to Business Reboot, which is a program of the Veteran Business Outreach Centers, part of the SBA, again, the Small Business Administration. They have a particular version of Boots to Business Reboot that is designed for veteran farmer and agricultural businesses in particular. So I just wanted to highlight that they have got a cohort of that coming through next month, if that's something you're interested in. Even if you've completed Boots to Business, you can come back and do Boots to Business Reboot. This isn't something that IVMF teaches, but it is something that you can access by reaching out to the Veteran Business Outreach Center. I believe that is being offered remotely. I did just kind of want to throw back to the discussion about IVMF and also just kind of remind everybody that for many of those that are in a rural, whether non-farm or farm, the idea of needing to diversify your income is something that many of us have needed to figure out. And it's certainly something that can also support capital readiness. So if you have another source of income, that can help. And I wanted to point to the Onward to Opportunity program that IVMF has as a potential way of obtaining additional certifications to allow for that other employment. I also kind of wanted to just throw out there too that there are some county and state grants, and to look for that. Utilizing the word grant can be really valuable when you're exploring opportunities for capital. You've got to throw your hat into the ring to see if you can be eligible for these things. I know, every now and then IVMF participates with some of our funders in offering pitch competitions, and it is amazing to me sometimes how often it matters that you've just put an application in and you've explained your business. You see people improve over time in how they're able to share what their business is doing. And I've pointed out a couple of those there. The other thing that we find in terms of capital readiness is people not realizing that, like there is a VA guaranteed loan, which decreases your risk to the lender, to the bank, if you're looking for a home loan, there are actually SBA and USDA guaranteed loans for those in rural and remote areas to access business loans that are not, this is not, borrowing the money from the SBA. It's like the VA where they guarantee the loan. That can make you a better risk to the lender. And sometimes that can be the challenge too. Going directly to a bank for a commercial loan, you're going to be less of a good risk than if you go through one of these SBA guaranteed loan programs. The max limit on, say, the SBA 504 loan is $5 million. And so we're not, even for those companies that are saying they need more than 100,000 or 200,000, this is absolutely something that falls within the scope of that. Equally, the USDA not only is a lender themselves, they also do have some subsidies and grants. And I've shared some of the different programs that could be of interest to some of you. I find particularly the Rural Micro Entrepreneur Assistance Program particularly interesting because it doesn't just rely on agriculture. It also makes note of those rural small town businesses, especially for those of you who are kind of solo entrepreneurs or trying to build this yourself. Equally, they have some very interesting supply chain and value add grants that can offer either interest-free, very low interest, or actually just literally granted money that's available. So I wanted to kind of give that overview on capital readiness, but just know that we will at IVMF had more coming on that. We've recently received a grant from the Department of Commerce that we're about to get started on that will offer some additional capital readiness resources. So look out for those too. Over to you, Adam.
All right, so the data we shared today is from this research brief. If you would like to check that out, here's the the location for that. But I also wanted to share, and Cassandra has shared it in the chat, link to our digital library. That's where we keep not only all of our publications, but we have curated resources for a variety of needs, of one of which is veteran entrepreneurship. So we do have a variety of resources that you can access digitally there in that collection. And then the employment economic opportunity collection there also includes resources for employing veterans. So if you're at a point where you are hiring employees and want to create a more veteran-friendly employer and know how to do that effectively, those resources are in that collection. So I encourage you to check out those digital collections and these briefs, other briefs that we've produced in our publications. Let us know what you think and what you need and topics that would be of interest to you. So now I'll turn it back over to Sandra.
All right. Well, thanks so much, Adam and Anna, for that great information. So what we'll do now is just take some questions, if you guys have any in the chat, and we'll also just go ahead and introduce some questions that were submitted by our registrants. So one of the questions, or I would say one of the most popular questions we received, Adam and Anna, was, how can rural veterans access and leverage data to identify and pursue business opportunities in their communities? What would be the best way?
So Adam is absolutely more of the data professional here between the two of us. But as an entrepreneur, one of the best places that I like to start when exploring potential data-driven opportunities is actually going back to the US Census. So the US Census, or census.gov, has a small business portal. It's free to access. And I usually start by looking at county level data. So I look at the county and it can tell me all sorts of things around household size, disposable income. And that can help when you're trying to establish opportunities. If I know that there are a lot of a population between certain ages, that can help. I know that some rural entrepreneurs have used that to identify the best counties or the best locations to start daycare centers, to explore home health care as an option, those kinds of demographic driven opportunities. That's a good place to start. I think if you're looking for data around particular types of production, whether it's food production or raw materials, once again, like the USDA and actually the Department of Labor have free data tools that you can access. One thing I did want to give a plug for, when we're talking resources here too, Cassandra, would you share a little bit about the alumni resources that many of these participants are going to be eligible for?
Yes, of course. So as you mentioned, Anna, there's a breadth of resources that we offer within our IVMF alumni network. So I want all of you to know that if you are an IVMF graduate and you're interested in like market research, and if you've graduated, let's just say from the EBV program, we do have the EBV National Information Portal where you can access different types of platforms for this market research, platforms such as Mintel, other platforms to obtain that great information to learn about your industry and what you need to do exactly to further your business development. So that's one of the resources specifically based on like the EBV program, but we have so many more. As Adam mentioned, we do have the digital library that you guys can go ahead and access, look for publications, different types of resources, information. And it's really, up to you. If you would like these resources, definitely get in contact with us. We do have a direct email where you can send any correspondence related to alumni benefits, basically any other question you have about professional under business development. But yes, there's so many great resources that you can utilize to leverage that data, and then to further your business or even professional development. So what I'll do is in the chat, I'm going to go ahead and include. Oh, thank you, Anna, for that. And then I'm going to go ahead and include our direct email in case you guys have any questions. But I would suggest if you are an IVMF graduate, definitely reach out to us. If you're not sure of the type of resource that you may need at the moment, we can definitely set up a consultation, 30 minutes, 45 minutes to identify exactly what you need. And if it's data specific, we can also help you navigate through like the EBV National Info Portal and the digital library as well. All right, and then here is the email. And then one other question I also do want to just go ahead and introduce. So this one is more towards like how to safeguard personal information. And it goes, how would an entrepreneur best safeguard their personal information and other business data? What would the best way be to do this?
So the first part of the question was how to safeguard personal data. I think one of the best ways to do that as a business owner anywhere is going to be making sure that you at least have access to an ITIN, so a taxation identification number, so you don't have to give out your social security number. So that's kind of the very first place to start. You can use that ITIN even before you've established any kind of like formal business. So you don't even need an LLC or an S Corp or a C corporation to obtain that ITIN. It just separates things a little bit from your social security number. So that's the first place. In fact, as soon as you go ahead and you have your formation sorted for your business, applying for your employer identification number, and you don't need employees to do that. It's a little bit of a misnomer. Apply for your EIN, so you never have to give anyone your personal social security number as a business owner. The second thing is actually, remember that there are ways to protect your personal information. So for example, especially as an active duty military family, I always use a corporation's agent in the state where my company is formed. In this case, it's Delaware, who is the legal agent. And so my personal home address is not on any of the public documentation. And that just gives me a little bit of protection as well. So there's that. So that's kind of one of the personal protection side of things, is just being mindful of how much do you want to, and that's particularly a challenge when you're in a rural area, right? When everyone knows who you are and where you are and all of that kind of thing. In terms of protecting business information, there is a multi kind of step process. I will say, exploring things like making sure if you do have a website that you have an appropriate firewall on that website. There are different tools that you can use. I will say and this is not a particular recommendation, but on my business websites, I always used a product called WordFence. But definitely the alumni resources, I know that Cassandra has folks that she can connect you with who will be able to talk you through like specific things related to firewall and cybersecurity and how to protect that. There are some important basic rules to understand around making sure that if you do have an email list, that you're utilizing that properly. I think in short, just be mindful to not collect more information from other people than you really want to be responsible for holding on to. So I never had any need to collect anyone's social security number, so I don't want that information. And I know we at IVMF spend a lot of time telling people, redact that. We don't want to see it. I hope that that's a very basic answer, but I hope that's a beginning.
No, it was great. Thanks so much, Anna. And as you mentioned, as an alumni, you do have resources such as, just at the top of my head, fight cybercrime, knowing how to recognize, and then even hopefully you never get into the situation, but recognize and recover from cyber crimes. And then these resources are like webinars, articles, additional information that you can utilize to become knowledgeable about the types of cyber crimes out there, and how to best just identify, recognize, and recover from them. But yeah, thanks so much. I really do want to, thank you, Dr. Adam Pritchard, Dr. Anna Blanche-Rabe, for all this great information, these wonderful insights, because I think, of course, it is kind of like a work in progress, but we're getting there. We're definitely getting there. And yeah, I also want to thank you all for joining us today. We will be sharing the content, the slide content, along with all of the links that we shared with you before the end of the day. So yeah, I just want to thank you both again for sharing these insights, these resources, much needed. And just thank you to our participants today as well. Thanks so much. Have a wonderful day, everyone. Bye-bye.